Uh, Recording is started.
Great, great. Well, everybody, hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to ASCDI. We have a very interesting webinar this morning. And by the way, the reason we're using this format, because if you want to turn on your cameras, feel free to do so. This platform will let all of us kind of share, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we have David Dow this morning, but if you have questions as David goes along, feel free to kind of, ask your questions, turn on your camera. We want this to be a give and take, as much give and take as possible. But we're really excited about this one today because, what we wanted to do today was discuss the ITAD industry a little bit from the perspective of the enterprises that you're trying to do business with. ITAD certifications, a lot of it's changing, but a lot of it's driven by, what do the enterprises, what do your customers want? Because that's really where you should be skating, if you will. You should be skating to where the puck is, to where your customers are. So that's what David's going to be speaking about this morning. And David, I'm really honored to have you here today. I've told people that you're probably one of the world's leading experts on what's going on with ITAD in the industry and certifications and so forth. So thank you for joining us today, and please take it away.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. And thank you for joining. I will be potentially coughing once in a while. I am in Boston, and the weather has been very interesting. It goes from cold and raining to beautiful now. And of course, if I do cough, apologies in advance. Now, let me get started by saying that in just a few years, our sector, the ITAD sector, the ITS asset disposition, and you would include sort of electronic recycling, has evolved from being what I would consider a minor back office operation to what is today an essential element or pillar, if you will, of the global things from compliance, sustainability, and the circular economy landscape. How do we know? How do we know that? Okay, can you guys hear me?
This is an ITAD presentation.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so the numbers speaks for themselves. There are a number of sources that provide data and analysis on sizing the marketplace, but in general, ITAD and related services have become a $25 billion industry, and they're projected to more than double by 2030 based on a number of estimates, while e-waste and data security markets are driving what we think is a broader $100+ billion compliance and reuse economy worldwide. Now, just like Joe mentioned, enterprises across a number of verticals, primarily healthcare, finance, and cloud infrastructure, are modernizing at a fast pace. But the challenge that we're seeing has essentially shifted. We're seeing factors like regulatory demands, we're seeing tight margins, we're seeing strong influence of OEMs. All of these factors are requiring a new level of professionalization and things that make sense, for example, complete traceability instead of what used to be for the past 20, 30 years, volume, right? So that's the shift that we're seeing. At the same time, the outlook, from what you see here, the green and red bar, the outlook has turned moderately positive, but remains conditional. So what I mean by that is that growth prospects are increasingly determined by our sector's ability to professionalize and embrace things like digitization with major drivers. And we know these drivers, what these drivers are. We have policy, we have AI, we have sustainability trends. And equally importantly, we're seeing capital flows that are playing and now outweighing these persistent inhibitors that we've known, like market segmentation, like compliance cost, and of course, industry skill gaps. Now, broadly speaking, we're seeing a fundamental shift. Instead of what used to be sort of late stage ad hoc cleanouts, ITAD now is being brought to the table by new players in the enterprise. We're used to deal essentially with compliant with procurement and with IT. Now we're seeing new players from CISOs and compliance leaders to sustainability directors, those responsible for such things as brand trust, responsible for legal risk and transparency reporting. And this is what I sort of coined the term ITAD 3.0. Now, let me step back and look at how we got here. For those who are interested in a little bit of history. Now, the first generation that I would call ITAD 1.0 started in the 1990s and ran up to about 2008, a period often referred to as the Green IT period. And I met many of you during that time, if you remember right. So it was at that point, it was sort of a back office work, even at some point considered as a janitorial function in many companies and in their IT departments. Most providers, as you know, operated like clean out services. They did pick up, destroy, document as little as possible, and then move on. There was almost no regulatory oversight, and data destruction was barely discussed. And the idea of environmental impact simply wasn't part of the business model in general. Then came what I would call ITAD 2.0, and that's sort of the age of certification and early consolidation. And we saw standards like R2 and stewards emerge. That essentially gave the industry its first real framework. And for the first time, we could say that ITAD has begun to shift to become a professional field. But this period also brought obviously a number of growing pains for sure. If you recall, the 2008 financial crisis hit, and investors saw ITAD as an opportunity to scale given the low cost of acquisition. And we remember back then Arrow and Ingram Micro and others trying to consolidate the space when they assumed that volume and global reach could create efficiency. It didn't work that way. Many of those roll-ups underestimated the complexity of ITAD in the area of compliance and data handling, regional specialization, and the challenges of integrating all of these acquired companies became a big problem. And so perhaps I would argue that they may have been too early in the timeline. Had they waited a bit longer, the environment would have been much better for them, as we see today. Now, obviously, each of these ITAD periods left us some lessons to learn for sure. ITAD 1 taught us that what happens when there are no standards. The industry was poorly managed, clients got burned by data leaks, and the entire industry had to build trust. Then came certification. But ITAD 2.0 taught us that certification alone doesn't create value. You can be R2 or eStore certified and still lose money if you don't manage process discipline or understand your asset mix. And now in 3.0, we're learning that the market is interested in maturity and is rewarding it. And so companies in the sector, in my opinion, will increasingly have to prove that they are operationally sound, but also have solid security, sustainability, and transparency rules that will help them integrate into their large clients' systems. So, in my opinion, this professionalization is good for everyone. It's pushing ITAD up the value chain, and it's integrating it into the board level reporting for sustainability disclosure and audit frameworks as well. Now let's look at the drivers of the ITAD sector that we're seeing taking place over the next year and beyond. And let's start with the basic elements, that is hardware. The good news is that the market remains strong. If you look at the OEM earnings, they're all showing consistent demands for servers, for networking, for storage. We're seeing enterprises are refreshing at a steady intervals. to boost, productivity, performance, efficiency, obviously security as well. The transition to AI-ready infrastructure also has given the entire life cycle a new momentum with all of these, build-ups that we're seeing everywhere. However, what's different again this time is what I would call discipline. Now, CIOs that we talk to, they're telling us that they are aligning their refreshes with risk management and compliance objectives. And that's creating a more stable environment for ITADs. Now, instead of being what used to be a surge and bust cycle, like we saw during Windows 10 migration, we're seeing now a more predictable, sustainable refresh behavior. So where is the growth coming from? There are, in my opinion, several drivers that are shaping this industry's future. First, as I mentioned, enterprise refresh cycles, especially in healthcare, a sector that's been booming in terms of ongoing refresh cycle, but also finance. We're seeing that in the tech sector. We're seeing that in public infrastructure. All seem to be returning to more predictable patterns. Second is the secondary market has become also mainstream. Certified refurbished products that we've been tracking the past few months are now widely accepted, and they're sold not only on places like eBay and Amazon, but through OEM branded outlets. And we're seeing an increasing number of ITAD companies interested in building their own stores. Thirdly is the circular economy mandates from governments and from investors that are accelerating the shift towards these concepts of compliance, traceability, and resource recovery. Very important points. And again, very important ones because it's one of the most important fast-growing driver that we see is this material extraction from retired electronics. The recovery of precious metal, rare earth elements, and critical materials from end-of-life IT equipment has become a major profit center, a huge interest for large companies around the world. Global e-waste, as you know, contains metals valued at up to $60 billion annually in terms of the extraction, and ITAD is increasingly playing a central role in this concept of urban mining, as well as in sustainability materials management. So there are obviously in this picture some headwinds, and that includes the things that we are accustomed to, the tariffs, the geopolitical tensions, and obviously inflation, all of which continue to constrain logistics and retail markets. We're keeping an eye on energy costs and, of course, interest rates that are, as you know, squeezing margins. And critically, ITADs that rely on easy access to volume should be concerned, as the future growth will be, as I mentioned in probably in many of my previous slides, will be less about volumes, more about operational excellence and other aspects from efficiency, from delivering on both environmental and data security outcomes. Very, very important for ITAD 2.3. Now, layering on top of all of that, as I hinted earlier, is artificial intelligence, which clearly is changing how we operate in the ITAD world. Now, modern ITAD facilities that we're looking at are increasingly deploying robotics for dismantling. They're deploying AI for component recognition. We're seeing systems that can now identify material types and sort components faster and with fewer errors and mistakes. Some operators, as I said, use AI-driven audit trails that match serial numbers automatically against disposition records. And what does that mean? Well, it means improving compliance and reducing manual labors. That increases productivity enormously. Now, these technology rollouts obviously reduce human errors. They help accelerate turnaround. And what's interesting, they also allow smaller facilities to compete with larger ones through smarter technologies, and we're going to see more and more of that going forward. And so as you think of ITAD 3.0 and beyond, think of it as much about software architecture as just physical logistics as well. Now, on the client side, AI is obviously creating a whole new refresh wave. Enterprises are upgrading to GPU heavy servers and high bandwidth networking. Every time that happens, obviously older equipment, think of Gen 10 and Gen 11 servers, older switches, legacy storage, all of that tends to flow into ITAD pipelines. That's good news for the industry, but obviously, like anything else, there are some caveats and it raises expectations. I think that this trend creates two powerful opportunities. First, in the secondary market, where demand for refurbished enterprise hardware, especially servers and high-value network gear, is seen or is witnessing a record growth as organizations look for cost-effective, reliable assets, and so do consumers as well. I mean, we've been tracking the back-to-school season, and it's phenomenal how many of those secondhand. Now, secondly, there is a significant value to be unlocked through what I called earlier urban mining. The retirement of these advanced systems delivers sort of a higher concentration of recoverable materials. Think of precious metals and critical minerals, all of which are fueling new revenue streams and are supporting global supply chains for the next generation electronics. Now, in both resale and material extractions, the AI-driven refresh cycle is rapidly expanding what's possible for companies in that sector, whether you are an ITAD company or an urban mining company. Lots of opportunities going forward now, especially, or in addition to this, sovereign and government AI projects are also driving demand for more stringent data security work. They need more verified data destruction. They need on-site shredding. They need witness processing in what is considered high compliance, high margin opportunities for ITADs that can meet the standards, of course. Another interesting point is sustainability. And sustainability, a bit of a replacement for the word ESG, but sustainability is also front and center. It's built now into law. Think of right to repair legislation that's expanding in the US states and across Europe. And as I said, despite these political headwinds, sustainability reporting rules from the EU and California require companies to disclose how they handle end-of-life IT, and that's becoming part of financial and regulatory filings. It's very critical to acknowledge that. The implications for ITAD providers is very important. It's major. If you are in ITAD and you apply you work in that sector, you are now a compliance enabler by providing verifiable reports on asset reuse, on recycling, on carbon savings, etc. You actually are helping your clients meet their legal obligations under European laws, under California. And the way to think about it is this shift is that it transforms you as an ITAD company from what's been considered a service cost into a compliance investment. And that's a very critical shift that we're tracking. Data protection, obviously, is, from our perspective, based on all the surveys that we conduct and our discussions that we have with decision makers, is probably the single biggest shift in client expectations. Our 2NE stewards, as you know, have played a critical role in shaping the operations of hundreds, maybe thousands of ITAD companies. While it's certain their role as an industry standard will remain critical, it's important to also acknowledge that large companies are more reliant on ISMS standards rather than recycling standards per se. For instance, under ISO 27001 and SOC 2, embedding the ITAD company's information security management system in the client's own ISMS is extremely important, and we're seeing more and more of that taking place. We're helping a number of companies adopt, ISMS on the ITAD side and outside of the sector as well, and that's because their clients are demanding it. So in this context, many ITAD companies are now being vetted by clients' CISOs rather than their procurement teams. That means we're entering the same, what I would call the same trust domain as managed security providers. So that's very important. In the ITAD 3.0 era, if you are in that space, you will have to prove data integrity to be a successful player. And to achieve that, the technology already exists and is in use. Think of tamper-proof audit trails, real-time status dashboards, end-to-end transparency, etc. All of these technologies and more are about evidence. And without it, without the evidence, the relationships that you have with the clients may not be enough to sustain business. So it has to be more professionalized going forward. Let me
David, just a question. So you talk about the service vendors, or we're making a shift from being service vendors to compliance vendors, if you will. We're providing compliance services. Does that mean then we're targeting different people at the enterprises we're trying to do business with? Are we going to legal rather than data processing, for example?
Yeah, so Joe, years ago, when we started sort of mapping the decision-making world in ITAD in enterprise, we saw about 7 stakeholders. And that goes from, obviously, the number one has always been, still is IT departments, with with the involvement of procurement. These are the two most important, probably, elements. And you had, of course, the people that set the rules or help set the rules, and those would include, obviously, legal, finance, etc. At some point, the green IT guy was there, but that's faded away over time. But then now we're seeing the return of sustainability officers that play a big role as well. Their role diminished a little bit this past year due to political headwinds, but there is no returning back. I think that stakeholder is important. What we're seeing, very, very critical point, is the involvement of people that in the past may had absolutely nothing to do with ITAD, and those are the cybersecurity folks, the CISOs, etc. They have the knowledge base. They know what kind of problems their companies are facing in terms of data security risk. They have the relationships with the C-suite, and so they can certainly influence a lot more than IT. They do have the budget in many cases. So we're seeing an increasing number of companies relying on their CISOs to drive this. What do CISOs do is essentially they are the carriers of or the gatekeepers of ISMS, Information Security Management Systems. Those are tied to ISO 27001, SOC 2, etc. That's their priority. And part of the mandate of those certifications is to ensure that the supplier is doing the same thing. There is a domino effect, which means if your client, let's say a big bank, is dead set on adopting ISMS, which is increasing over time, they will likely turn to their suppliers. And if you are one of their suppliers or contractor, they will demand that you would be ISO 27001 certified or at least ready. And so I don't know if that answers your question, Joe, but roughly, yes, it's no longer just an IT situation. It certainly involves so many stakeholders and more to come for sure.
Yeah. Well, the scary part of that is that though, if I'm targeting the CISO, he's a security guy, right? So his mindset's going to be, let's crush everything. The most secure in his mind. If I crush the equipment, nobody can steal the data off of it. He's not necessarily a green thinking guy.
Yes, and you have to balance it with other stakeholders. In other words, you have to bring in the sustainability folks, the sustainability folks on one hand who can explain why elongating the life of a device is very important. You can bring the finance guys because you could say, okay, well, rather than getting rid of all of that stuff, you can actually get some money back. The maturity of the ITAD space will require that those that are managing those companies will retrain their sales organizations to understand the language that each of these 7, 8 stakeholders speak. And
That's
to your point,
exactly, yeah,
absolutely.
that's exactly where I was going. What do our salesmen have to learn, do in order to talk these? Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, before you even get to the salesman, I think the C-suite, the corporate leaders of those companies have to be prepared to do a re-engineering of their go-to-market. They have to figure out, the channels they're going after, on the end of life. And remember, and my next talk here is specifically about the critical minerals. That's going to be a huge, that is a huge interest. I mean, you see companies like Arubis, installing an $800 million facility in Georgia. You're seeing the U.S. government through DOE, the Department of Energy, putting a lot of money, for production in the U.S. and extraction in the U.S. And of course, that's not just that; that's batteries and etc. And so, that's a channel. Refurbishing is a channel. Recycling is a channel. Parts harvesting and putting those parts back into the warranty market is a channel. But there's also a channel the top in the upstream. How do you tackle all the main stakeholders to get those feedstocks and to convince the CISO not to destroy, but there is interest to do it, and so that requires all sorts of preparedness and all sorts of corporate re-engineering, at least on the go-to-market side for sure. So, for specifically this slide, let me shift to what we've been covering fairly recently, but increasingly it has a sort of a strategic angle, and this is this so-called urban mining. As nations look for alternative to imported critical minerals, we see a huge role for the electronic recycling stream to become a resource base. And I noted a minute ago, companies that are investing, governments that do no longer want to rely on imports, etc. And I think that ITAD sits right at the intersection of all of this. Think of recovering copper, gold, lithium from end-of-life IT assets. All that ties this industry directly into the national debate over not only just sustainability, but also around the concept of industrial strategy. I mean, after all, we hear that the density of gold from urban mining is bigger than the density of gold from regular gold mining. And companies around the world are paying attention to this. European companies are putting assets in the U.S. Australian companies are going through, and we're going to see a lot of acquisitions in the months and years to come. And this means that ITAD now becomes a geopolitical element, not just environmental or data security. Now, and if you are therefore part of the supply chain for critical minerals, like batteries, like renewables and defense you're going to have a critical play there, and the value of your company will eventually increase as a result. That's why more governments are paying attention to the recycling and material recovery than ever before, from China to Australia to the United States. So if you run an ITAD company or you are involved in the end of life of electronics, you should be aware that access to high quality, preferably high quality feedstock, preferably this low quality, and there's going to be demand for that as well, but high quality is the best, of course. All of that is in the minds of many large corporations and global investors. It's becoming a defining factor, and we've been engaged in a number of discussions with investors that are looking to buy the entire solution from so-called cradle to grave, right? From getting the feedstock, dealing with ITAD operations all the way to the end of life through recycling. And I would say that OEMs and financial lessors are reclaiming lease returns, and they're also closing internal loops. At the same time, we're seeing smelters, brokers, and battery recyclers competing for the same high-grade materials. So as an ITAD, as an independent ITAD company, for instance, that means you may have to be also looking for specialization, and that to me would be the path forward. Now, one way to ensure you have a seat on the table is to focus on the upstream relationships. For a while, I was very hesitant to to consider K-12 or schools as a good place to as a good ITAD ITAD origination, because they always tend to get rid of older assets. But schools, healthcare system, enterprises that own their hardware outright are places you need to certainly connect with. You need to offer them the right stuff, security, logistics, reporting that OEM generally cannot match, or leasing companies cannot match. I think that market is still wide open, but in general, I sense that it's becoming more polarized between the commodity processors and folks that are compliance specialists. And so that's an interesting market to watch for sure. We've seen that the difference between success and failure often comes down to operations. If you recall, Arrow's exit and Close the Loops, that's an Australian company with operations in the US, Close the Loops' recent challenges remind us that integration, system uptime, and asset quality essentially determines profitability instead of just relying on volume alone. Of course, volume is important, particularly when you talk about urban mining and you're dealing with K-12. That's what most likely you'll get. But if you really want to improve your margins, as I said, integration is very important. System uptime and asset quality are things that you have to keep in mind front and center. And so to be considered a strong ITAD firm, it's important to treat process management as a discipline. How do you get there? By that I mean you must have documented workflows, resilient IT systems, and certainly a clear sense of which contract actually makes money. We've seen many companies that basically, get contracts, and at the end of the day, they get really bad assets, and they don't know what to do with it, and they get troubled because of that. Another area to watch are the OEMs like HP, Dell, Lenovo, etc. They want to capture much of the remarketing value through their own leasing and take-back programs. They've been very aggressive about it. They don't talk a lot about it, but they're doing it. They use quite a bit of a number of companies that may be in this call today as partners. At first it can seem like a closed door for independence, but I think there's still a lot of opportunities because OEMs need your help in terms of regional coverage. They need help with certified subcontractors, sovereign compliant contractors, folks that may have strong practices in Brazil, for instance, or India. The way to look at these OEMs is probably collaboration where possible and differentiation when necessary. You definitely have to have the ability to differentiate yourself, but also don't look at these OEMs as competition, but as partners for collaboration. So how do you tackle your own business? Now, as I said, it's important to remember that transparency in this version 3.0 of ITAD is becoming front and center, is becoming kind of, I would call it, the currency of trust. Enterprises and investors that we've been talking to really want real-time visibility into the ITAD workflow in general. And that would include, as you know, all the asset level tracking. Not only that, carbon accounting is becoming important. Laws are being enacted to track that, right? And of course, compliance verification. And so, if you consider a trustworthy partner, you most likely have to focus on building and refining your automated dashboard and essentially, everything that's an auditable report. In the meanwhile, we note that investment interest and capital investment interest and capital. Those are people that come from the Wall Street world, if you will, are returning to the sector with strength. But this time they're selective. In the past, there were a lot of investments that investors accompanied, helped, but they were sort of a passive investor. They were not involved in the operation. Now, investors that we engage with are looking for mature companies or companies that they can scale and become mature and ready for compliance maturity for things that I've been talking about, sustainability credentials, automation readiness, etc. In addition to, of course, being a player in the feedstock world. So as we look at towards 2026, the shape of the industry becomes more sophisticated. AI will continue to drive refresh cycles for a long while, but we expect growth will be rather steady, not explosive. And to thrive, the company in the sector will have to combine all the technical precisions that I've been talking about, and I insist on the compliance depth and the sustainability intelligence. All of that have to be there for reporting and to match your clients' requirements. So, final slide, and that's about compliance standards, the company I represent. And as you can see, we at compliance standards, we sit uniquely at the intersection of several critical stakeholder groups. And you can see that from enterprise IT departments and CISOs to investors to industry media. Our primary commitments, however, is to support ITADs and recycling companies that are in this call and others to understand market condition. We understand the pressures that you face, and of course there are too many of them to list, but I can certainly say from shifting regulatory mandates, unpredictable market conditions, and to obviously the constant demand for excellence in data security. And we help you understand market conditions. We deploy best practice, improve compliance frameworks, drive efficiency in asset recovery, and of course downstream material management. As you prepare for 2026, that we think is going to be definitely a banner year, whether you're seeking, actionable market intelligence, you're looking for confidential benchmarking, you're looking for partnership strategies, you're navigating investor scrutiny, we can certainly help you there as well. So if there's any interest in learning more about our services, let's connect after this session to discuss how we can help you. And of course, my email and in my LinkedIn connection link is there. And so with that, I think I'll pass it back to Joe.
Great, David. Thank you. Question on certifications. For a long time, R2, E-Steward, DISA, all these certifications were the direction that the ITADs were going. If I understood what I heard you just present, ISO seems to be now a bit of a maybe even a more driving factor. Or what do you think? What do you think? Certifications worth the investment now?
They are necessary. Think of R2 and E-Stewards as absolutely important credentials, but it's an industry specific. It's industry specific. You need that if you are in ITAD, and it's basically these are basically standards that set the tones, the standards for for the industry to deploy the right matrix, etc. Do they affect enterprise clients? I would say the recognition of E-Stewards and R2 is there, but it's not it's not a make or break. ISO could be a make or break. ISO is a make or break for a number of companies. It's not widespread yet. It's not all the Fortune companies, but it's getting there. And the difference is one is very much industry standards, that is R2 and E-Stewards, environmental, data security, etc. The other one is integrating in the enterprise security practices. Is there an overlap? Right now, there isn't, but there will be. I think both of these types of certifications have to meet. That's the good news. The bad news is, of course, it costs money to deploy all these certifications and to adopt them. So if you are a company that is already R2 and eSteward certified and or eSteward certified and others, NAID, etc., now you have to go to the ISOs, and it's gonna add to cost. Is it worth doing it? I think absolutely it is. We're helping companies that tell us it's critical for them to do it, or else their customers will drop them, and that's not good.
Right, go ahead.
Yeah, David, you mentioned ISO a number of times there. You're specifically talking about ISO 27001, right? And there's a lot of other ISOs, but that's the one you're talking about, right?
Yes, absolutely. This is specifically to related to information systems, information security management. So
Right.
it's very specific. The other ones, to your point, right, deal with hygiene and safety, employee safety. They deal with automation, etc. So this is specific to integrating a company's information security management. Just think of it as you as a company ensuring that you have policies around emails, around take your own device, around people coming in and out, around the security of your network, where do you store your data. It's very much management centric, but specific to security in the enterprise, and that's the difference. It speaks directly, it creates that link between the ITAD provider and their client, whereas whereas R2 and eStewards are specific to the ITAD company's operations in compliance with the rules that R2 eStewards have created, and so it's very much industry versus the other one is industry to industry. That's very important for sure going forward.
Thanks. Another question, if I may. ASCDI is known for their ethics program. How do you see ethics being an important part of ITAD 3.0 and going forward?
Yeah, so ethics, as I said many times in my presentation, everything is through evidence, right? Everything is through evidence. The more you automate, the more you create APIs that allow your partners, whether it's on the supply side or clients, to get into your system and have pure transparency, as much transparency as possible. I think that deals with the ethics part of it in most cases. I haven't given it a deep thought about it, but I think the common denominator, right, is evidence. And evidence is to ensure that you have all sorts of checks and balances in your IT departments. And that's why I did say in my talk that the business is more becoming a software platform more than a business that is about volume and volume recovery. And so, yeah, I am a big believer that software will help determine ethics through transparency, and that's very important.
And Reich, thanks for asking that question. And everybody, I didn't pay Reich to ask that question, but that really is an important one for ASCDI. We find that their companies can be certified by all kinds of bodies, but if they don't do what they're committed to do, that's a problem. And our ethics committee regularly handles ethics complaints by end users against certified ITADs who don't follow through on what they commit to do. So, we believe all the certifications are important. We believe the ISO is very important. But if you don't carry that ethics, the ASCDI Code of Ethics, the ethics logo, we think that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think you guys have to really drive this discussion with your members, drive this discussion about really how do you be certified, but even before you become certified, what kind of strategy do you have to pursue to improve your internal information system? And look, I always tell, it's cool to be a CEO of a company. Try to be the CEO of an ITAD company. It's got to be extremely difficult because you have so many moving parts, and you are required to be, to provide all sorts of transparency. And what is more important in IT environment than ITAD? I mean, this is the area where basically there's going to be, I would predict, a lot of visibility and a lot of oversight and a lot of interest going forward because of all these moving factors. And so the more you optimize your IT infrastructure, the more you push for dashboards and things that absolutely give you an up to the minute data on your operations, the better equipped you will be. And I mean, remember, probably many of your clients are in that 4,000 company list that California released. Whether it's a bank, I mean, the names are there, so this is no secret. Whether you're Wells Fargo or Bank of America, if any of these guys are your clients, they will come to you and they will ask you to make improvements to meet their standards. How are we dealing with all these IT assets that you guys are carrying, at the end of life? What is the implications, and how are we going to report that to California or to the European Union? And if you report to California, most likely you have to expect other states to follow suit. If not in the short term, certainly in the midterm, and certainly in the long term. The sooner you get your IT and transparency system going, the better positioned you'll be.
David, we talked about enterprises driving some of the change in ITAD. I like, you calling it ITAD 3.0. We're also finding regulations. ASCDI has been involved consulting with the European Union on the digital product passport. We're the organization that's representing the ITAD industry, if you will, with the rollout of the digital product passport. And that's going to require transparency. When you put something on the market in the European Union, they want to look at the history of that product. When did it enter the market? When were the drives erased? And when you finally are done using it, what's the CO2 impact of it? So regulations are driving it as well as enterprises. But I want to throw one more at you. That's CO2 reporting. We find enterprises also now starting to demand, reports, CO2 reports. What's the CO2 impact of the IT products you're putting back into use or disposing of properly? But that also, allows us, for some kind of greenwashing, if you will. I mean, whose CO2 report do you believe? And that's a question I don't know if you have an answer for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think everyone is aware of greenwashing, and that's why, if any of these companies that are hearing me are tempted to release their sustainability reports, you be careful how to phrase it, because many of the sustainability reports that we've seen from ITAD companies and OEMs, et cetera, you can drive a truck through them. I mean, the sustainability report is now, in many cases, not most, and I can't say that, but in many cases, they're basically a marketing document, and it's great to have it. But going forward, as I go back to the theme of transparency and evidence, if you are going to say something, you better have the evidence for it. And to your point, Joe, decarbonization is a big wave, is a wave that slowed a little bit because of politics. But it's not going away. It's not going away because if California demands visibility, and you are a company, headquartered in Delaware, but you do business with California and it brings 10, 20% of your revenue, it's very easy to say, okay, well, if we're doing it for California, let's do it for everybody else, for all other regions, because if we normalize it, we standardize it, and up we go. So California, in some sense, in the US is a driver. The European Union has been doing it for a long time, so it's no problem. But yes, this decarbonization is very important. You see a number of organizations and companies trying to play in that market. So you see an ecosystem of analysts, of trackers coming, including people and companies and organizations. Some define themselves as NGOs, which is another red flag. NGOs that would help you play in the carbon credit business, in the carbon trading business. Look, ITAD and recycling are in the best position to be the best players there. They have the hardware. They have the hardware. They have the end of life. They have those products that can be reused, recycled. You can document all of that. Do we have a standard that documents it and that's agreed by regulators? Not yet. And that's why you're going to see a number of them coming out of the woodworks trying to, capture that market, carbon accounting and carbon trading and sustainability reporting. Great. I mean, that's how this market works. And eventually, some leaders will come out of it. But this is very, very important for sure.
Yep. Somebody just posted a question which you just touched on a little bit. They talked about the RECQ label, if you will. That's the one in France. So there seems to be some sovereignty stuff going on in the country called California and Europe. But the RECQ, is that only used? Are you familiar with that? And is it only used in France?
I'm not familiar. I have no doubt. I mean, France has, is very much ahead in sort of the decarbonization curve than most other countries. I mean, that they mandate now 7% of government procurement to be used equipment. I think it's 20%. So
yeah,
2 out of 10 PCs are coming from ITAD streams, so to speak. So of course there's going to be organizations that are going to try to come up with the right matrix, the KPIs, the right data. And I'm not surprised to hear that a French company is into it. You'll see the Germans do that as well, and they might help create the standards eventually. But yes, definitely a market to watch, and a market to watch not this year. It's going to take a long time. So for folks like us, like me, who observe the market, it's going to be an interesting few years to go.
Yeah, Jan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, so you were before me with the carbon reporting was, of course, it's going to be a demand to showcase the impacts for the company, but it will also be a necessity for the larger companies that will require you to have your own company to be by a third party be audited and to provide your data. And I think that's coming up more and more. So I'm busy with the European Commission, and one of the things running now is a review of eco design on computers. And we just last week did publish some figures, and I was just trying to align that. So for me, ITAD, it's covering really two worlds. End user computing and data center equipment are totally different. And for me, I wasn't too much into the laptop and PC area. And just to throw some numbers that we did put forward to the Commission. So we see ITAD predominantly aiming at, let's say, the business PCs and then business laptops as the priority, because that's 80% of the volume. So what we accounted for is that on an annual base, there are about 20 to 24 million laptops being deployed to the European market, which makes a market for ITAD, because it's probably a refresh, that's a market of 24 million devices, assets to be handled. I don't know if that's a number that you agree with. I think for the US, so this is Europe was about 22% of the market. I think the US is probably 45% of the whole laptop market, which is about 250 million a year. So just trying to touch base. Do you see that as indeed a core market? If that is the case, we see that if you look at sustainability, are you as ITADs now touching the devices only once? Yeah. So after the first use, and in how far can we look forward that you will be touching it twice? So I didn't forgot to post it. So just a UK strategy, and I see the same things appearing. We see especially from the side of the public sector aiming to go to 75 or 80%, which is in the UK report. They want in the next 5 years they want to go to 80% of the purchasing to be remanufactured, reused hardware. This means that you can be taking it out, providing again, and then another takeout. So this would be, yeah, a booming element for the market, and also a huge responsibility, because this is the way to reduce resource consumption, etc. So yeah, that was a bit of the observations that we have. Next to that, quickly touching base what you mentioned about the OEMs. So yeah, we see HP, of course, very busy with their program and involving also ITADs in their refurbished market offering. So there will be pros and will be cons. On the other hand, they also announced here in the Netherlands, and I think in the Nordics, that they will be offering a 6 years lease, including a refurbishment after 3-4 years, in which they probably also will need refurbishment part, etc. So there's indeed some stuff on that. So, well, recovering quite a bit. Is it indeed something in the market that you see? How do you look at touching the devices twice or maybe 3 times? And those are the core things that I was curious about. I don't know how you're looking into that.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. I agree with you. I think right now there's too many moving parts, really. To your point, data center is big, and there is a giant in the data center, and these are the hyperscalers. And the hyperscalers essentially escapes the ITAD sector. It's housed in Amazon. Amazon does everything. Amazon is a gigantic ITAD company. you know, uh, Nobody can get, very difficult to get into the data center, their data center. Same with Microsoft. Same, they see value, but it's not just value. They're not just greedy. They don't want to share. They're concerned about data security. But those investments, and you hear that. I mean, you hear those discussions every day about how AI is going to tile the entire world with data centers. Huge problems. And so if you see someone like Amazon being very territorial, they will open up eventually. So I said companies will have to be ready, or companies that are in the business of recovering, they have to be ready to do that. On the device side, on the distributed device side, your numbers are right. I think that the outlook is very unclear yet, and I'll tell you my concern, Jan. My concern is that the industry is currently building devices that may not even last 2 to 3 years, because they are going to create new AI models those models are going to make the previous generation devices very obsolete very quickly. And so I am more in favor of estimating the numbers a little bit higher than lower, or even where we are. So take whatever number you have and apply in your forecasting model a faster refresh cycle because of that. And remember, the consumer market hasn't really got into this game yet. So everything that we see is enterprise driven. But the moment the consumers start getting in, they understand AI, they understand how an NPU chip is doing, is helping them. Then you're going to see more interest. And then at some point, a very simple application. I remember back in the 90s, I don't know, maybe Joe, you remember when we used to get those AOL CDs? Those AOL CDs, one product, and you got mail, were essentially the biggest driver of growth for many years. And that pushed for the desktop in ways that forecasters couldn't predict, because we didn't know AOL is going to do it, or CompuServe, or whatever company it is there. On the laptop side, it's shrinking the device and having Wi-Fi. Two huge drivers. AI is going to do that and more because it's so unpredictable, or the speed of evolution is predictable. We know that a technology today that Microsoft wants to move to Windows 11, that many of the PCs are coming with NPUs. Consumers don't get it, and I'll be the first one to say, I don't know how to use Copilot. I try to use it. It always asks me to put the file on the cloud, and and I don't do that, and I don't do this. It's like, okay, they're not getting their story right. But once they get it, you're gonna see Adobe creating products for this. You're gonna see all sorts of software companies creating products that's gonna make the laptop that is a year, 2 years old completely obsolete. So I think you absolutely have to expect that. Now the problem is, what do you do after this? For now, I have to say, looking at it from a North American perspective, I don't see a second touch with the product. I see the first touch, and there's definitely a market for the second touch. The first touch is the ITAD company doing all the magic, giving it to a recycler, and off we go, or selling it into the secondary market and losing track of it. This summer, I bought about 4 used laptops, certified laptops. Nobody knows me. I don't know who I get it from. It's from Amazon. Amazon has a contractor, an ITAD company, that refurbishing company, sends it to me, and that's it. The challenge for industry and regulators like you guys is, how do you force that second transaction to be tracked? And that is a database thing. It's regulation. It can be done. The companies that I bought those systems know me, but there is no regulatory requirement for them to track me, which means this device that I'm using it's a 5-year-old device. What happens afterwards? I don't know. Maybe I'll send it to one of Joe's members.
David, thank you. Everybody, thanks for joining us today. It was great. We're kind of at the end of our time right now. Hopefully, we'll see you if you guys are going to the EBM event in Dublin. We'll see you there. ASCDI is going to do a little bit of a bus tour and a pub tour and whatnot. So if you want to join us, go to our website. You can sign up there. If you want to get hold of David Dowd, feel free to contact me, and I'll put you in touch with David. David, thank you very much for your time and your education. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Everybody have a good day.
Bye.